Once again, welcome everyone. This is Hazar Yildirim. I'm the Director of Strategic Alliances at AFS Intercultural Programs. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on leveraging technology to support ongoing intercultural learning during this ongoing pandemic. We are especially pleased to see so many of you tuning in during these difficult times and hope that the webinar will help you with your work and with your students. Before we begin, we would like to share a couple reminders. As you might have already noticed, you are all on mute and you are able to speak, but you will have to raise your hand and we will unmute you. There is a designated Q&A section at the end, so we do suggest that you hold on until that point. But if you have any questions during the presentations, you're welcome to submit them using the Q&A button on your screens, and we will try to get to them either during the presentation or at the very end. I also want to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available to you after you complete a quick webinar evaluation that will pop up on your screens at the very end. Similarly, an email reminder will be sent to you. We will also share the slides with you. There are several links and resources, so don't worry, you will get a copy of the slides after you submit the evaluation. We are also trying to live stream this for our AFS volunteers and staff members around the world on our intranet. So a warm welcome to them as well. So today, as I mentioned, we are going to be talking about leveraging technology to help ongoing intercultural learning during these challenging times. At AFS, we are very pleased to see that about 7,000 of our students who had to cut their experiences, their study abroad experiences in short, are actively engaging with each other and with the educational content that we are providing to them. And Linda will speak to that at the end of this presentation. And we know that many other organizations are also struggling to figure out the best ways to provide learning opportunities for their students and learners. And I hope that the theories that we will share during this presentation, as well as some of the tools, will be useful for your work as well. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator, Linda Stewart. She's the head of Global Competence Certificate at AFS, and she will lead us into the discussions and introduce our two wonderful speakers to you shortly. Linda?
Great, thanks Hazar, and welcome everybody. As Hazar mentioned, I am the head of the Global Competence Certificate Program at AFS. And today, I am joined by, first I'm going to say a few words about AFS. So many of you may be familiar with AFS as an international voluntary nonprofit organization that has been working to develop students and global citizens around the world for over 100 years. But what you might not know is that AFS began as a volunteer ambulance corps during World War I as a way to provide humanitarian service amidst a global crisis. And today, we find ourselves amidst a different global crisis, COVID-19. We continue to support students and educators around the world in 60 countries, finding ways to advance their intercultural learning and global engagement in a constantly changing environment. So you can see a little bit about our organization. As Hazar mentioned, we did repatriate nearly 7,000 students between the months of February and March due to COVID across 60 countries. And we are pleased to say that they are all doing well and continue to be engaged on our global platform that we'll talk about a little bit later, the Global Competence Certificate. Today, I'm joined by two experts in the field. First is Dr. Sarah Jones. She's a lecturer at the University of Hull in the UK. She's Director of Learning and Teaching in the School of Education and Social Sciences. She is also a Deputy Chair of Education Futures Collaboration, and her most recent book was published in 2016, Researching and Evaluating iPad in Learning. So we're very pleased to have Dr. Jones with us today. We also will be joined by Amanda MacArthur, who is the Chief Program Officer at Pixera Global. She leads the organization's global programs, a team that designs and implements programs that link human capital to initiatives addressing complex development challenges around the world. And she has been with Pixera since 2002. So join me in welcoming both of our speakers as we continue to talk about ways we can leverage technology in this kind of current and post-COVID-19 world. We have 4 talking points today, if you want to go ahead and just show them all. First, we'll be moving learning online, the challenges and opportunities that presents. And I would say, quite frankly, the difference between moving online and remote instruction, as there are significant differences. The best practices for effective, accessible, and scalable online spaces for all of our learners. Some specific online tools, virtual platforms, tech-enabled alternatives that are out there, and then a brief time for questions and sharing your best practices. We're going to start really quickly with a poll, and that will appear on your screen right now. The question is, for the foreseeable future, does your institution plan to use one of these methods? If you want to take a minute. Virtually synchronous, virtually asynchronous, virtually blended, online or live, in person, or not applicable. And I'll just leave it to you, Hazar and Camila, to close that when you have enough participation. All right, and I think we're going to close it. Thank you for sharing. Great. So as you can see, the majority of you are planning to use a blended option between something that is online, asynchronous, and synchronous. Super. All right, with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Jones. And, oh, I'm sorry, we do have one more poll. Thank you. Okay, this next question is, what platforms are you currently using to connect to your learners virtually? So go ahead, we're just, trying to get a sense for what people are using out there. And if you're using something that's not on there, please go ahead and just drop it into the chat. So these options include Google Classroom Hangouts, etc., Zoom, Skype, Moodle, Brightspace, Udemy, Kajabi, Learning Management Systems, or other. And we're going to close the poll. Thank you for your participation. I mean, there are so many out there, so it's great that people are throwing some additional options into the chat. Thank you for that. Zoom will be pleased to hear that it is the winner currently at this point. All right, great. Thank you so much for your participation in that. All right, Dr. Jones, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? I hope everyone can hear me okay. It's lovely to speak to you all. I'm from the University of Hull in the UK. Yeah, I've worked in the field of educational technologies and online learning since the late 1990s, and I've done a wide variety of work, both nationally and in fact internationally. I've worked for the World Health Organization as a consultant, and UNESCO and other organizations. So I'm hoping that I can share some useful tips with you today. I realize you're a broad audience. I'm going to try and put a bit of theory in there, a bit of practice, some top tips, just to try and make sure there's something for everybody. I'm struggling to move the screen forward. Is it coming now? Yeah, okay. So I've been asked to talk about how we move learning online. I've also been asked to have a look at innovative tools. And if there's time, I will also talk very briefly about a research project that I'm currently leading on. So let's get straight to it. And probably the most important side, and if you take nothing else away from this presentation, I hope you'll take this, is that when we move learning into the online environment, what we don't want to do is replicate what's already taking place face-to-face. So we're not trying to take face-to-face into the online space. And actually, if we do that, it usually leads to 3 things: demotivation of the learners, disengagement and often very little learning. So that's really not what we're trying to do. And I realise in the emergency of the pandemic, that's probably been really difficult for all of us not to do. But I think as we're looking at the new normal and going forward, we need to start planning how we might change the way that we move face-to-face learning into the online environment. And one way we can do that is by starting to disaggregate the key components of what it means to be involved in teaching and learning. And I think we can look at that as learners themselves. We can look at teachers and the roles that both of those play, and then look at pedagogies themselves. And by pedagogy, we're talking about the art and the science of actually teaching. And when we move online, when we see it being done very effectively, we note that there's a change in the relationship between the learner and the teacher. So often where it's done really well, we see that learners have more agency, they have more control over what it is that they're learning and when they're learning. And necessarily there is a change in the teaching practice. So no longer are teachers concerned about so much the content, but their focus shifts far more to people and processes, the learners and the way the learners are engaging in that learning process. And of course, depending on the nature of the change in relationships and the practice and what it is you're trying to achieve, you will access technology differently. And obviously technology is completely important in the online environment. And I think it's worth mentioning that actually technology actually opens up a shift in the notions of time and space. So there's a whole raft now of literature, of theory that's starting to emerge in the field of education called third space learning. And this is really about learning anytime, any place, anywhere. And with the advent of technology and the increasingly complexity of technologies, we're able to shift the way that people access and where they access their learning. And the most important thing of all of this is the purpose. So the purpose of the learning should underpin absolutely everything you do. I think if you're thinking of something like a formal setting, like a university where I teach most of the time, purpose would be associated with learning outcomes. But in less formal settings, it might be, are you trying to get learners to change a behavior or learn a new skill? Whatever that purpose is, that should drive everything else you do, your use of technology, the way that you relate to your learners, and the types of pedagogical practices you use. And those will affect the technologies that you select and that notion of time and space. So let's have a look. I can only do this briefly, but let's have a look at learners. This is my goddaughter here, actually, and she is playing Minecraft. There's a few people in there. She's building some spaces, and you can see just in front of the computer is her iPad. She's Skyping with somebody. She's got both hands on the go, and this is what our young learners look like today. And it would be a mistake to think that because she can play effectively in that environment, that actually she can therefore learn and be an effective digital learner. And this is something that we need to be aware of as a teacher, that just because people are good at young learners are good at playing with technology and using them as games, it doesn't necessarily mean they know what to do when it comes into the learning environment and using those same digital tools for learning. And often you need to develop some of their skills, and for some of them will be new skills. And so I'm thinking about things like time management, online teamwork, how you work effectively for learning purposes as a team, how actually you use some of these tools for learning purposes. And of course, there's the other things around responsibilities. I think that the nature of your personal responsibility as a learner online changes, and associated with this is the notion of self-discipline and proactivity. And as a teacher, you have a role not just to get the learning online, but actually to think about the learners themselves and the skills that they will need to develop in order to learn effectively in the online environment. So when we think about the teachers, we've talked about the new roles, and actually this is not to say that you should stop being a teacher, but actually you need to be mindful that there are other roles that you take on in an online environment, which could be a guide, a mentor, a coach, facilitator. There are many other terms. And yeah, I think it's not about stopping teaching. It's just literally about thinking differently about what your role is. And again, this is guided by the purpose of the learning that you're doing. We've talked about space in the last slide, and I think you need to think more creatively about how you use space in the online environment. So I know when we do group work in a classroom, most of us will know how to arrange desks so that groups can work effectively. We'll be able to walk around the classroom and watch what groups are doing and see how they're getting on with the work we've set them. But how do you do that in an online space, and how do you use breakout rooms effectively? A lot of this will need planning beforehand. You'll need to test out technologies and usually use a combination of technologies to achieve that. So as teachers, you need to be thinking about not only your role, but the space in which you're working and how to use that effectively. We mentioned time briefly in the last one, and I guess, Linda, you've also talked about this, about the difference between synchronous and asynchronous. So synchronous is real time. We're synchronous now. For those of you who are live on this, I realise if you're watching the recording, it won't be. Asynchronous happens when it's not in real time. So you access things at different times to other people. And you can have a mix of synchronous and asynchronous in any learning instance. So you might have a week of activities with one webinar in the middle of it. So that would be a mix, as opposed to a mix where it's face-to-face and online. And I've talked a little bit about this in the last slide, about changing pedagogies, how teachers now, when they move online, need to think less about content. When we have content everywhere, what we need to think more about is people and process, and the criticality of the content that you're looking at. Of course, there are tensions for teachers in moving into the online space, not least associated with time. So some people will expect you to be there 24/7. You might even expect yourself to be there 24/7. And I think there's a whole exploration of what your expectations are, not just of yourself, but communicating those to your learners, and also telling your learners what you expect of them. And this is tied up with roles and responsibilities. And if I've got one piece of advice, is when you move into the online environment, it's never a great thing to do, particularly with asynchronous learning, to teach on your own. It's much better to teach in at least a pair, if not in a team. And again, how you arrange that depends on the kind of learning you're trying to achieve. Just looking at the people and processes, if we look at people first, if we're focusing on the people, we need to start thinking about how we engage them. Discussions don't just happen online. You actually need to think about building community, building a sense of place, and making things relevant. So for example, if you're doing an icebreaker, try and make the icebreaker relevant to the fact that they're actually all working online and you can't see each other and you don't know where everybody is. So for example, an icebreaker could be, what's the view out of your window? Most people will have a window to look out of in their homes. So, you know, that would be a great idea for an online icebreaker, or make it relevant to the actual work you're doing. Think about how you're going to bring people together as teams. Think about how you might encourage peer learning. And then you also need to think about the types of people, how people appear when they come online. So there's lots of different terms, there's lots of different typologies. I've just put champions, paddlers and lurkers there. Lurkers, of course, being people who don't appear to take part in anything, but it's a mistake to think that just because they're lurking, they're not learning. Actually, I found that some lurkers can actually engage in really deep learning, even though they don't appear to be taking part. Facilitips, this is facilitation tips. And if you do a search on that, I'm sure lots of different things will come up. And again, it will help you to build community. And actually, there's a relationship between what back channeling is and champions. So for example, if you're trying to get a discussion going and you don't want to be the teacher constantly going in, you might find one of your learners who is a champion, who is very engaged in the learning process. You might contact them offline using a phone call or an email, just saying, look, come on, could you just go in and say something, just maybe pose a question, because otherwise it looks like it's always me. So think about your typologies and how you might be able to use people in order to stimulate and engage that discussion. In terms of process, it's probably best to think of it as the 3 T's: tasks, tool and timing. It's, I think we've talked about moving away from content and more about the process. I think with regards to tasks, usually what we would do is set up what I've called provocation. So a 2-minute video, a short paragraph of text, something that people can have a look at, almost like a stimulus for people to see, for your learners to engage with. And then to follow it up with a couple of provocative questions, which will stimulate dialogue. And again, get your champions to seed the discussion in order to bring the discussion and the dialogue out. Think about how you might be able to use learning logs. And of course, for those who are in more formal learning instances, think about assessment and how you can tie in the task with assessment to show evidence of learning. It's almost the carrot and the stick. Once you've decided on the tasks, of course, you'll be able to think about the tools. And there's a whole gamut of tools out there, from mind maps, quizzes, there's discussion tools, which are different to debating tools. And again, think about your timing. Is it a synchronous activity you want to do? Is it asynchronous? Is it a mixture of the two? And a lot of this will come down to your purpose. If you remember that previous slide, purpose, purpose, purpose. What is it you're trying to achieve at the end of the day? And that will drive much of what you decide here. This, you know, as I said, I've been involved since the late 1990s, and research into online learning has been going for a very long time. I couldn't possibly put up all the references that are here, but this is just something, if you're interested, to help get you going, and places for you to look and read, to sort of explore some of the topics in more detail. I'm not even touching on accessibility and inclusion, but there's some really good guidance out there when you're moving face-to-face learning into online, when you think about those issues. I'm quite interested in design-based learning. I'm doing a bit of work on that now, and I'm particularly interested in it because it's a very inclusive model of learning, and it's around equality. I mean, you can see there it says embracing diversity, and the model of design-based learning really enables you to think more innovatively, creatively, and outside of the box. So it's something you might be interested in exploring as well. And I'm happy to talk to people outside of this about design-based learning. Technologies, well, there's loads and loads of technology out there. I guess considerations are things like, has your institution already paid for it? Because if they have, you'll have to use it. Yeah, and I guess the other thing I would say is that there are usually some really, really good tutorials out there on how to use, not only how to use them, but how to use them educationally. And that's not just the collaborative tools that you see up here, but also the apps. You know, there's hundreds of apps and other pieces of software that you can use for educational purposes. So yeah, have a look at the tutorials. They're usually very good. And if you're not sure where to start, what I would suggest doing is putting a search in to find tools. So I just put a search in the other day, best educational apps, and this is what came up, a website that's got a whole load of apps in here, and they rate them. What I would say is think about the provenance of the website that you're looking at. So what does the URL tell you? Is there an About Us button that you can actually see? Is this a company or is it academic researchers? How have they evaluated which the best educational apps are? So be critically aware when you're looking at these things, and use teacher ratings, for example. Yeah, and another tip is that in my experience, I've yet to find one technology, one piece of software that does everything I need to do. So normally I would combine technologies. Here you can see an example of some work I did the other day with a group of learners, and I had breakout rooms in Zoom. I had Google Docs open for the agenda of the meeting, with links to drawing documents where people actually, in this particular meeting, that I got them designing mobile apps. So, and we've got chat windows open. So think about how you might be able to use a combination of technologies in order to achieve the learning outcome. So again, I'm coming back to that purpose of learning again, and choosing the tools appropriate to that. Okay, that was a real whistle-stop tool. I'm going to move very quickly on to innovative tools. And actually, the tool that I'm going to talk about is virtual reality. And that's been requested by AFS, but also it's something that I'm starting to explore in my own work at the moment. You are reading that right. It says augmented reality, not virtual reality, but I thought it would be useful to start with trying to differentiate the two, because people often get the two mixed up. If we think of augmented reality as a way of adding additional material on top of what it is you're already seeing around you, so we call that layers. So you'll have as you look through your phone, there'll be additional layers of things that you see through your camera. So in other words, it's a way of connecting data through your mobile device to the physical space that's actually around us now. Some examples of that, actually a QR code is a good example. For example, you might be in Barcelona and hold your phone up to a QR code on a building and by Gaudi, and it might tell you all about his architecture when you put the QR code in. Some of you might be, yep, there you go. Somebody's already put Pokemon Go up, and there is Pokemon Go. So that's another example of augmented reality. This is one where you hold your phone up and you can see the cafes, the historic buildings, where are the toilets, where's the hotspot, Wi-Fi hotspot, where do I get a bus from, in a completely strange town. There you have it. And this is one that's used educationally. This is called a video enhanced observation tool, and it's for teacher educators to use with their trainee teachers. So as a teacher mentor is watching a trainee teach, they hold their phone up and they have some predefined tabs so that they can use it as a reflective tool to analyze teaching behaviors with their trainee teachers. Of course, that tool can be used in many other contexts as well, but that was how it's designed. So how is that different to virtual reality? Well, virtual reality is where the user, the person, experiences or perceives of something as if they were actually in another place, as if they were somewhere else. So you might have heard of things like virtual spaces, immersion, sensory feedback, etc. These are all elements of virtual reality. It might surprise you to hear that actually a telephone is a form of virtual reality. I can phone my mother who's in the other end of the UK. I'm not with her, but I'm experiencing it as if I was with her because we're speaking over the telephone. So actually you can argue that a telephone is virtual reality. And in that same breath, so would Skype be. So is what we're doing now. I mean, clearly we're not all sat next to each other like that picture, but this is a form of virtual reality. Virtual learning environments are a form of virtual reality, but the separation here is with the first three pictures, that was all synchronous. We're now moving into a place where it could be synchronous, but equally it could be asynchronous. And extending that even further, we now have wearable technologies which enable us to experience virtual reality in a different way. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that now. So this is where you can get somebody might have created a 360-degree video or a photograph and stitched them all together, and you can download it onto your phone. You can see at the cheaper end of things, we've got some cardboard there down in the bottom left-hand corner, and you can slot your phone in, hold it up to your face, and you can play the movie, and it's as if you're there. Obviously, you can extend that and make that more immersive. If you see the guy in the top picture, I think he might be a fireman or somebody, but he's actually he's wearing the headset. Actually, some of them have earphones, headsets, so you can hear the sound as well. And then you also have controls, so you can actually interact with what's going on. If you look at the screen behind, it looks to me like he's trying to extinguish a fire in a control room. So it's about learning in different contexts without actually being in that place. Great for health and safety, but also you need to think about how it can be used for intercultural learning, perhaps. And then if we move down to the bottom right-hand corner, you can see this is what we would call a fully immersive room. This particular picture is taken of risk planning. But there's a lab that I've been to in Sweden where you can project the 360 video on the floor, on the walls, and on the ceiling, and you can actually experience everything that is going on, not just by looking at it, but also through all your senses. So there was the example they gave again was a fire crew, and they had some burning buildings. As you walk towards the flames in the room, you actually got the sensation of heat. as parts of the building were falling down, you could feel vibrations in the floor, and the floor began to move. You got the sensations of smells, etc. So this is what we'd call fully immersive. And I think there's huge educational opportunities for virtual learning. And there's actually quite a lot out there already. So I put some examples up here. The one surrounded by elephants is what it feels like when you're surrounded by a wild herd of elephants. It's quite a nice one just to look at. You can look at all of these online, but to be honest, you can make a piece of cardboard and stick your phone in, and you'll get a better experience. The Sustainable Development Goal Action Campaign has actually created a lot of videos which are really, really interesting, and I'd urge you to go and have a look at those to help you see how this technology can be used to increase intercultural awareness and to learn about issues that people face in different parts of the world and that are very different perhaps to the ones that we experience ourselves. A very good one is this one here, The Forgotten Ones. I hope I'm not going to, we practiced this once before, let's see if it works. If I press play, does it come up? It does, but we don't have sound. But you can see this little control circle here. This, if I was watching this live in YouTube rather than within the presentation, I could use these arrows to actually move the camera around. So at the moment, we're just seeing a still picture, but actually, if you use those arrows, you'd be able to see what was going on behind you. You'd be able to see all the marabou stork flying overhead. I'd be able to see the door outside from that. So yeah, that's just but I'd urge you, you'll get the presentation afterwards. I'd urge you to go and have a look at these four. Okay. So I'm trying to do quite a bit of work with 360. I'm learning about it and trying to use it in the context of global competence education in specifically teacher education. I was at the AFS conference in Hungary in 2018 actually, and I, after my presentation, I put up this challenge by Reimers, who talks about global competence education being problematic because teachers tend to think of only their subject area. They're compartmentalized within their curricula, and they can't think across disciplines. And because of that, it makes it very difficult to integrate global competence education into ordinary school-based education. So I posted that challenge up there. I actually said I'd like to create a project to look at this in teacher education. I'd already looked at it in school education, which you can see as the previous project on global competence. That's the link below. And I worked with Melissa Lyles, who's the Chief Global Education Officer, I believe, I think I've got her title right, at AFS. And she was interested, and between us we found some other people, and we created a 3-year project which we were successful in getting. You can see our project partners are across Europe. It's European funded. It's unusual to get a New York based non-European partner, but I think that shows the importance of AFS in this partnership. And we basically have 5 different outputs we're trying to achieve over the course of the 3-year project. And I'd probably talk about the teacher training program. We haven't started it yet, or we're just starting it. And what we're doing with that is looking at the use of 360-degree videos to actually take those immersive experiences, those intercultural experiences to learners in the comfort of their own home, which is particularly important at the moment when they can't travel. The idea came because not everyone can travel anyway, and we wanted to make it inclusive of everybody, whether you have the funds or the ability to travel or not. So we're exploring the use of the 360-degree videos and still pictures and how we can use those. You can see this is our first attempt at doing it. This was in Florence in Italy back in February, and that's about as far as we got until lockdown came. And so we're kind of on hold now until lockdown finishes and we can get out and start making more of these movies and then integrating them effectively within an educational context around global competence education. So there'll be more to find out about that. There's the link to the website. It's you can find out and keep up to date with what we're doing there. And if there's anything else you want to ask me, I'm sure you can get hold of me through AFS, or there's my email address there. And I'm sorry if I've overrun.
So much, Sarah. Truly, that was, I think, a semester course eloquently condensed into a 30-minute presentation. So we really do thank you. I think it was really affirming for me to hear, particularly some of the experiences and you know, suggestions and challenges that you've been through, especially like around the combining technology. It was really affirming to hear that you recommend combining technologies. We too have not been able to find a one-stop shop for all. Also, I think just acknowledging the overwhelm that one can experience when they are out there trying to find an educational app and how to choose. That I think is a real situation for many people. And the clear reminder that it is the purpose, right? That there is a process, and when we get to the purpose, if we can start from there, we can really go far with our design of our online or technological educational offerings. So much packed in there. Thank you very much. We will save a brief amount of time at the end for a Q&A. And we're going to swiftly move on to our next speaker. We have a poll on the screen which asks, what challenges are you currently experiencing or you would anticipate experiencing with virtual engagement, whether it be with volunteers, internships, etc. So go ahead and take a minute for that. The options are technology challenges. Current partner organizations don't have the bandwidth necessarily to host virtually. Lack of motivation from participants to dedicate time. Lack of engagement of participants on the call or on the video or other. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and close that, Camila. Great, and you can see the responses on the screen. A little bit of, primarily folks are worried about the technology challenges that all the participants may have, which is very common, and then also lack of engagement and how to get people participating when they're on. Perfect. So with that, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Amanda MacArthur, who is the Chief Program Officer at Pixera.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be joining you today. And just to confirm, Hazar, you're driving my deck?
I think he is, yeah.
Okay, great. So we can go to the next slide. I want to give you a little background about the organization I work for, because we're not actually in the education space. I work for an organization called Pixera Global. We have our primary office in the United States in Washington, D.C. We work globally. We have offices in India, Ghana, Nigeria, China, and Brazil and Argentina, but we work all over the world. And as an organization, we work on cross-sector partnerships. So we usually partner with the global private sector, so large multinational corporations, on programs that engage the public sector and the social sector to solve complex global challenges. We were founded in 1990 as a way originally for Americans to volunteer their time and professional expertise in the former Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc. And we have, over the past 30 years, kind of modified our approach to fit the times. And what that means right now in the COVID era is we are modifying our approach to be virtual. And so I'm going to talk to you about some of the lessons that we've learned and systems that we've put in place over really just the past 8 weeks or so. So we can go to the next slide. Just a little bit more about us, because it is important for you, I think, to understand that we come at this from a number of different angles. So we work with companies to advise them on how their social impact strategy, their corporate social responsibility strategy can inform and support their business objectives. We work with companies and donors, so USAID, the UN, World Bank, on programs that accelerate systems change in agriculture and enterprise development and small business development. And then what I'm going to spend most of the time today talking about is global pro bono, which is really about activating human capital, human potential. And for the way, there are a lot of companies and organizations out there that use global pro bono or have it as part of their employee engagement approach. We take it a step further. So we actually work with our clients, our corporate clients, and those include companies like SAP and Medtronic and Pfizer, 3M, who's in the news a lot right now, on programs that engage the skills and talents of their employees to work with social mission organizations. It could be educational institutions. We do a lot of work with universities. It could be NGOs or nonprofits. It could be governments, could be social enterprises, to provide pro bono consulting. So usually those are deliverable-based projects that engage their professional skills around a discrete activity in a 3 to 4 week time period. And for most of our programs, that is an in-person engagement. So we're often sending cross-cultural teams of corporate employees to work with a group of nonprofits or educational institutions in another market. We do a significant amount of work in emerging markets, although increasingly we do work in the United States and Europe. Didn't know there were animations here, but just go ahead and load them up. The reason that these programs are important are because they really have, they are win-win-win. So employees have this unmatched learning experience. They're experiencing a new culture, they're stretching their leadership skills, they're working across functions in a way that they haven't before. Businesses have opportunity to develop market insights. Obviously, it's a talent development program for them, relatively cost effective actually. And they, some of our clients use it as a research and development opportunity as well. They ask their participating employees to consider a certain challenge that they might be having in a market or in a similar market while they're doing this other experience. And then of course the community. So, you know, this really is about transferring skills and knowledge, multiplying the impact of local organizations that are addressing specific challenges. Most of our programs are designed to address issues that are challenging or that an organization doesn't have either the human capital or the financial capital to address themselves. Go on to the next slide. So when we're talking about virtual, what we have done really over the past 8 weeks is develop these series of models. And I wanted to share them all with you because I know you're all thinking about how can I ensure that our students have an experiential learning opportunity like a internship. And it's hard, obviously, if you're not in the office environment. It's such, you know, having that visceral experience is really critical to learning and to developing your skills. I do think you can get some of that virtually. And so I'm just going to quickly go through all of these models and then I'll dig a little deeper on the virtual, the first one here, all virtual, because it's probably, frankly, most realistic for you all. So all virtual is very similar to what we would do for a typical in-person project. Teams of corporate employees are assigned a host organization or a host client who has posed a challenge, and they are given a scope of work, a deliverable-based scope of work, and they work on it over a series of weeks, part-time. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the structure that we've put in place to make those projects as impactful as possible. Hybrid is very similar, except at the end of the engagement, we have an in-person moment. So whether that's a week or 10 days, where we actually have the team of employees go and spend time at the organization in the environment. And what that does is that grounds truths and ground sets their recommendations. So they have that experience. You know, as we are moving forward in this new COVID era that we are in, that might be something to think about, is how can we design internships or experiential learning opportunities for our students that are primarily virtual and maybe can be virtual for an extended period of time, but then have that in-person component at the end. An impact challenge. So these are kind of fun. These are, think of it like a virtual business case competition or a virtual a hackathon of sorts. So we develop these with organizations that pose a challenge, a complex challenge that they would like companies to look at. So we worked with BlackRock Financial last year in India to work with a local organization that works on financial inclusion issues, and they posed 2 challenges to the BlackRock India team around how the poor in India might better access financial services. Basically, how can the unbanked become banked? So it was a super interesting challenge. It was something that was in the wheelhouse of the BlackRock employees, but not something they necessarily worked on. So they were really stretching their skills. They were learning a lot about issues around financial literacy and financial inclusion in India, especially with those people living below the poverty line. I think that this is something that you could do with your students as well. I think, you know, at a class level or at an organizational level, you can have it as more of a club activity. There's lots of challenges out there, and these are really interesting ways for people to work together. And if you make it a competition, you know, we all like to win. So it's pretty, I think it just helps people maintain focus. Employee-driven or student-driven, this is where you ask your employees to bring a challenge to the table, or to bring, an organization to the table that they would like to work with, and then you provide them a little bit more structure around that. So the reason we have this is that this is really more of about the employee engagement and enabling them to support the organizations that they are passionate about, whereas our other programs are a little more structured about aligning with a company's goals. So a company like Medtronic, who does health technology, their focus area is on non-communicable diseases. And so all of our projects in that space with them focus on organizations working in the non-communicable disease space or public health space. And then finally, virtual clinics. And those are programs that, those are much shorter. Those are just very condensed consulting opportunities about a very specific topic. So it might be marketing professionals reviewing a marketing plan or website copy for a nonprofit, or it could be financial team, folks from the financial team reviewing a financial plan or a financial strategy for an organization. We can move on. So a little bit more on the virtual and hybrid, can be individual. I think team-based actually gives you a deeper learning experience and it helps people to stay engaged. Although, you know, you always do kind of have, as with any team project, we've all been on those teams in school where, you know, there's that one person who doesn't check in as often as you would like. The cool thing about these projects, because they're virtual, is that you can engage cross-cultural teams. So you can engage people from all over the world. The great way to encourage partnerships across different universities, and you know, something that I think could add a level of learning. Our projects are about 9 to 16 employees per cohort. We have found that an ideal team, if you're going to do a team-based program for virtual, is 5 to 6. So that with a model like this, we would be looking at somewhere between 2 to 3 projects per cohort. And what that does is it allows for cross-learning. And as I'll talk about, we recommend that you have, if you're sending students out to do internships or other experiential learning opportunities, if they're virtual, to bring them back together and have them have group discussions about what they're learning. So moving along, we could skip this slide. And this one as well. I know we're running short on time. One more. So best practices for virtual engagement. So, you know, we've talked a lot about the tools, and I would agree with Sarah that there just isn't the perfect tool out there right now. We use Salesforce Communities and Microsoft Teams, although because we work with the private sector, they often have their own models that we have to use. We don't tend to use things like Google Drive in that because of security concerns from our clients. But what I would say is make sure that everyone is aware of the platform that you are using. If you are in an internship program working with organizations, make sure that they have been fully oriented on it, but also be flexible if they have existing ones to be able to use those. Always recommend using video as much as possible, and obviously bandwidth is a concern. Next slide. So in practice, what you're really looking for is a communal place to save documents. I think what we're all struggling with right now is that, people are saving things on their desktops and they're not in one place. So again, orienting people, making sure that they understand how this works is really important, and facilitating as much as possible real-time communication. What you don't want in these experiences is communication happening only via email. That's really going to limit the opportunity for engagement. People are going to get actively disengaged. Next slide. So really being intentional is what we said, setting a schedule, working with your students to ask them to really be intentional about this as well. If the organization isn't thoughtful, it might fall on your students to do that. Make sure that you have schedules coordinated. Agendas are important. Encourage things like icebreakers and other ways to engage, right? Because you're not having that kind of water cooler talk. So for example, at my organization, every morning during this, we've had a coffee chat. So we all jump online. There's about 70 of us for 15 minutes and chat. And then at the end of the day, we have something, and we try to make it interactive. So on Mondays, we have family game night, and we play Pictionary online. On Fridays, we have a happy hour. If you are doing team-based, make sure one person is in charge. And I would recommend that you have the students self-select that. That is a great way to learn. Also, you might have people take other roles, the communications role or the document master. I guess next slide. I just spoke a little bit about the lead participant. Next one. So this is actually, I think, where it's really important. So when we have our virtual programs, we actually orient all of our host organizations independent of our participants, and then we orient the participants as well. Both teams also have a handbook that they are provided with that acts as a guide for the experience and gives them best practices. If you're working with nonprofits, especially if you are working in underserved markets, might not be used to this sort of engagement, and so really giving them support is important. And then we actively facilitate the first call. So we give very specific directions as to what we would like them to discuss, present, and we have people introduce themselves in a little bit more of a personal way, and then moving forward, we give them a little bit more freedom to move on. But I think especially in this space, it's important to, as much as possible, structure initial engagements. Next slide. One of the things we do as an organization is we focus on what we call citizen diplomacy. And really, this is this idea that everyone is a diplomat. Everyone has the right, or maybe even the responsibility, to engage across cultures. And so we actually consider engaging across cultures, engaging across in industry sectors as well, right? So nonprofits engaging with private sector. We speak different languages, and we have different objectives and different angles. And so taking a moment to understand how you engage across these cultures is really important. It's also important if you're engaging, obviously, globally, and that's really the bulk of this. And so it's very important when we do it for in-person programs, so that people understand that there's different ways of communicating. A yes isn't always a yes. If Americans, we think a yes is a yes and a no is a no, and that's not the case everywhere, as we all know. And so this is really asking people to consider how people communicate and how they are communicating, and what they should do to be a good citizen. Same thing from the nonprofit engagement side, right? So you might not understand why they're doing something the way they do, but they have different metrics of success than a company, and it's important to understand that. We can go to the next slide. So just kind of some best practices, like I said, have a virtual orientation for any organizations that your students are going to be interning with virtually, if you can, if it's a structured program. Same thing for your students. It's really important that you help them with the tools that they need to be successful. This is all new to everyone. A kickoff call, so like I said, a facilitated interaction as much as possible with the host organizations. And then if you do have a group of students, I would recommend having regular touch points so that you're bringing everyone back together. You can capture learnings and give people a forum to communicate and learn from each other. And yeah, well, I know we only have 5 minutes left. I want to make sure for questions, so we'll skip this slide. And that slide.
Perfect, great. Thank you so much, Amanda. And we are running up on time. I wanted to say thank you so much for that. I have a few things I want to share. We do have some questions in there, like people are asking about how they can connect with some specific opportunities in Africa. We might go a few minutes over. If you have to jump off, folks, that's okay. If you've asked specific questions and we didn't have a chance to answer it, we will answer that at the end or via email. So I was just going to take 2 minutes to talk a little bit about AFS's response in the COVID era. And, you know, one of the things that we've been able to do is take an already existing blended learning opportunity that we had, the Global Competence Certificate, and quickly pivot it to the current reality of COVID. And what we did is we made a special edition specifically for those 7,000 students whose programs were affected by the COVID-19 crisis. And they had expectations, of course, about what the program would look like and, you know, how it would end. That it wouldn't end. And so what we wanted to be able to do was keep them engaged in some way and show them that there were other ways to engage as far as like being online. So this is just a snapshot of what our platform looks like. We do have it hosted in a learning management system. And again, as I mentioned, it wasn't that we didn't have anything in place. So I sympathize with, you know, Sarah had mentioned those of you that are out there just quickly trying to bring this online or into a 100% virtual, like Pixera just was able to, you know, take what they had and bring it 100% virtual. We were in a place where we had something to start with. It was the scale that we weren't quite ready for in anticipation, and just some of the implementation and coordination that we had to take on as an organization. So previously, where we were looking at local implementation or 2,500 internal, external participants annually, we quickly moved into global and with 5,800 participants in 1 month. We also changed the audience, but we kept that synchronous and asynchronous. So currently, we have put in 5,862 students, and we trained 77 facilitators so that they could, again, help them reflect and debrief in those live sessions. It did start with a purpose. It started with the purpose to grow global competence and self-awareness, awareness of others, really instill these key intercultural skills through this educational framework that we have worked in conjunction with Dr. McVanderburg on. And essentially what the GCC includes is programs designed to use blended and flipped learning contexts. We glean from Kolb's experiential learning cycle. There are global forums that meet where peers can meet and share a common language and kind of have that mutual intercultural growth together. It is facilitated by a monitor. We have formative assessment throughout, some quizzes, some assignments that can validate the content learning. And again, we've trained several intercultural facilitators to help the students engage in those live sessions. It's self-paced to a certain degree. It's flexible. It can kind of spread out anywhere between 2 weeks to 6 weeks. We found as an optimal time up even to 6 months. So it was really, again, encouraging for me to see what Sarah offered as far as the people and processes kind of framework, because I can say that the program that we put in place and then pivoted even more so for COVID era does kind of check off these points as far as the peer learning that's happening in the forum and the live sessions. We do have all types of participants for sure. There is community building. I know for a student on an AFS program, typically it would be a somewhat bilateral experience, you know, going from Argentina to Belgium. And in this case, when they're on the online platform, it's quite global, and they're engaging with, again, peers from the 60 countries in what we've set up as brave spaces for conversation and dialogue. We have, as far as tasks go, I mentioned the assignments, assessments included. We have some debate on there, and as well as the synchronous and hybrid learning. So it was, again, encouraging for us to see that, and it is possible. I guess this is a note to everybody, it's possible. We combined our technologies. There's additional resources so students can kind of like choose your own adventure and go deeper into what they're interested in. And we have a training calendar. So again, at their convenience, they can sign into the time for the live session that makes most sense to them. So we also are using Padlet, I should mention, so that this is both an inward-facing and outward-facing place for students to kind of share their experience and upload their videos, which is, again, meeting them where they're at and more fun and interactive at their level. So what I would say is my kind of closing offering to you is kind of the tips for making the online learning better that we've come up with are the modules. We have taken the time to develop short videos that are animated and, again, with subtitles in 8 languages. We have theory, case study, and assignment is kind of our flow. There are discussion prompts with the features to upvote or comment for that engagement, and specific instructions, again, with opportunities for them to upload evidence. For the live sessions, we send reminders, it's easy setup, we clarify participation expectations, there are community participation ground rules. We do try to show our face as much as possible with video on. We try to stay on time and make access easy. So that would be an offering. And again, as Cesar mentioned originally, we will be sharing these slides with you. So, and this is just a snapshot of some of the partners that AFS is working with on the GCC. All right, so we do have a couple of questions. Cesar, I'm not sure if we can stay on for one more minute, but if you do have a question, please submit it in the Q&A. We are asking you to fill out an evaluation. If you're interested in a demo for the GCC, you can also request that in there. As far as the questions go, let me see. I'll take one if it's okay for Amanda, and we'll try to get one for Sarah. The question is, the question here is about if there are opportunities, collaboration opportunities for African teachers who are passionate about ICT integration into teaching and learning, and maybe what would be a recommendation, either Amanda or Sarah, that you would have for that?
We work a lot in Africa. We've worked with a number of educational organizations. So yes, absolutely. SAP also does a lot of work, and Intel in engaging teachers. So I would recommend looking at their websites. That I think they have opportunities available. I'm not sure where you are in Africa. There's a great organization in Ghana called Dream Oval that is specifically about bringing technology into schools there. And there's one in South Africa as well, and I am forgetting the name off the top of my head, but I will try and find it and send it to Linda to get to you.
Perfect, thank you. And also, if we can get this individual's name and share that with you. There's one more question I'm going to direct this to Sarah. The European Parents Association would like to point out that many of the pupils and families don't have access to technical equipment or bandwidth to follow remote learning. And so maybe if you would like to speak to that.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. I think it's very difficult to, it's the area of accessibility really, in terms of both the tool and the technology and the infrastructure and the connectivity. And I think locally, different organizations are trying to find solutions to this. So for example, I know at the University of Hull, we're working with our local communities to loan out some of our IT equipment to families who don't have mobile devices or don't have laptops, or maybe just have a small computer they share amongst a family of 6 where they have to work, 3 people have to study, etc., etc. So we're trying to make local solutions to the problems. And I guess you need to see what people are doing in different parts of the country and the world to see what local solutions can take place in this time of COVID. But yeah, it's a really valid issue. Yeah, I can't offer more advice.
Yeah, no problem. One more question I think directed to you, Sarah, would be, the person noted that they're finding the webinar very insightful. Is technology slowly replacing the role of teachers?
No, I don't think it is. I think the nature of what it means to be a teacher is changing. And, you know, I think it comes back to this notion of content. Content is everywhere, but I think what people lack is the understanding of criticality to the content they're looking at. And I think actually teachers are moving more as facilitators of learning. They're scaffolding and aiding people in the learning process. And actually their role is as vital now as it's ever been, but it is a changing role. And I think we need to look at how that manifests itself. And it comes back to that relationship between the student, the learner and the teacher, and thinking about learner agency and how we move to a time where learners have more agency over their learning, but it is scaffolded and carefully directed, if you like, or supported through effective facilitation and teaching skills, which will change over time with technology.
Perfect. And as our final goodbye, Sarah, if you have any tips, the last question is around any tips for energizing the participants when you are in a live session.
That's a tricky one, because as a host of a live session, there are so many things you need to do. You need to run whatever it is you're doing. You need to constantly look at the chat. You need to maybe change screens to go to different documents. I guess having a team of people would be my top tip. Make sure you're not the only one. And I think that's something I came back to in my previous slide, is make sure there's at least 2 or 3 of you running a session like you are here.
There you go. Practice what we do, right? All right, folks, we have gone over. We appreciate you taking the time with us today. Please fill out the evaluation, and we will be sending you the slide deck for future success. So thank you so much, Dr. Jones. Amanda had to run. Thank you, Hazar, Camila, and Andres for being with us, and we'll see you guys at the next webinar.
Thank you very much, everyone. See you in the next webinars.